Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about Terror of the Autons, written by Robert Holmes and directed by Barry Letts. This story introduces a few big parts to the Doctor Who mythos, the biggest one being the introduction of the Master, a renegade Time Lord who becomes basically the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock. It also introduces us to the new companion Jo Grant, played fantastically by Katie Manning, and also introduces us to a unit soldier, Mike Yates. And so this story is the first where we really get a feel of the family of UNIT. So this four-part adventure has some very high standards that it's got to come past, as you know, it's got all these big introductions. So is it one of the greatest Doctor Who stories? Does it surpass Spearheads from Space? I personally don't think so. I think a few elements of it keep it from being absolutely amazing. But let's digress. The story starts off with the introduction of the Master, and it is so iconic. He comes out of his TARDIS disguised as like a van in a carnival, and then this guy is like, "Who the heck are you?" And he turns around and he's like, "I am usually referred to as the Master." Very iconic line. But this aspect of the story, at least the setting of this bit, is where I have a bit of, not much of an issue, but half the story is set in like a carnival, and it does give the story a bit of a kiddie, not very much kiddie, but a much more younger demographic feel to it. And it does kind of feel like a late 80s story where they tried to balance more innocent storytelling and a much more darker storytelling, as there's a lot of death in this story. And it's got a lot of tension in it. Especially when we get reintroduced to the Autons. Here, they're a bit different. They've got a slightly different design, which I personally love, the more blank faces of these particular Autons. And they talk as well, which is really odd. And we also get the first time that it's specifically mentioned that the Autons are living plastics created by the Nestine, whereas before they was just sort of like drones, troops that were controlled by the Nestine, and plastic just seemed to be like a cover. So this is the story which made them really heavily plastic based, really, if you think about it. And the Master is a very great villain. Like I said, he's basically Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock. He doesn't actually give like a reason on why he wants to like conquer the world or why he wants to rule anything. It's just because he's evil. But because of the actor, Robert Delgado, and just the conviction that he gives, you don't really need a reason. You just kind of accept the fact that he is the villain. And he's basically like a mob boss, and I love it. And then we cut back to the Doctor getting introduced to Jo Grant. Now this is another element where it seems it's been targeted at a much more younger demographic than season 7, as Jo Grant goes back to the more traditional sense of a companion. So I know a few people who don't like but I say few. I know one person who doesn't like Jo Grant, and I can understand. I think she comes off like what people clichély think of a companion. She's there to ask questions, being a bumbling idiot, getting herself captured, screaming, asking questions, basically being the Doctor's shadow for most of the story. But I think Katie Manning's performance really elevates this character to something a bit more special. I don't know what it is. I think it's because it's Katie Manning. She reminds me of a teacher that I used to have in school. She's so sweet and innocent. You can believe that she is just this really sweet and innocent person that just gets into these bad situations. And she basically works for the Brigadier, who's basically pondered her onto the Doctor because she has relations in place of people of high places, and so she basically works for UNIT against the Brigadier's better judgment. So basically, half the story is the Doctor trying to get used to this new companion, as with Joe Grant, there was much more of a scientists equal thing going on. And so as we're going back to this tradition of the companion being a bit more dull than the Doctor is struggling to cope. And there's a great scene at the start where the Doctor goes to the Brigadier to ask, can he basically get rid of her for him? And and Brigadier's like, all right, I'll get rid of her, but you've got to tell her. And then she walks through the door then, and the Doctor, because she can see how just excited she is to work with him and stuff, he basically lets her work for her. I really love that scene. But the problem with Joe Grant's introduction here is that because her character is a bit more young oriented and you've got this younger storyline, it means that when we go back to the villain's plot and you see somebody being suffocated to death by a chair, or somebody being stalked by this really terrifying doll-looking thing, which is one of the earliest memories I have watching Doctor Who, is this old guy getting murdered by this creepy, weird puppet monster. And I don't think it really balances it too well. It feels a lot like a lot of Doctor Who stories did later on in the 80s, where it struggled to keep the focus on whether it should be a fun younger story or a much more adult, serious story. I don't think they're not exclusively. You can't have them together, but because you introduce in both Joe Grant and you have the Master's introduction, you kind of feel like, right, there's an issue here. Not to say that this story is bad by any stretch of the word. There are some really great scenes, especially in one of the cliffhangers for part 1 is that the Master basically kidnaps Joe Grant and mind controls her to basically set off a bomb in Unit HQ, which would kill the Doctor herself and Mike Yates. And that's a really great cliffhanger. It's a shame that the resolutions of some of these cliffhangers in this story are a bit anticlimactic. The Doctor basically just chucks it out the window and it blows up in the lake. So that was kind of disappointing. But it does have some really great moments like that. And mainly the story then for part 1, 2 and 3 is basically just a goose chase on trying to find the Master and where he is and how his plans work. And there are some really great moments. One of my favourite moments is when the Doctor and Brigadier they go to this plastic factory that they suspect that the Master's working at, and the Doctor's trying to crack a safe, and then he opens the door and there's an Auton out there and he tries to shoot them, and then the Doctor closes the door and he turns to the Brigadier and is like, what does he say? He says something like, they're very persistent, aren't they? So that's a very cool scene. And there's a great bit later on in some of the action in this story is, there's been better action in the last season, but here it's done pretty well. Barry Letts directing you isn't his. I don't think it's his strongest work. I think we've got a great script. We've got a great story. We just don't have the directing by Barry Letts. Kind of lets it down here. Not to say that he's a bad director. I mean, go back to my Enemy of the World video, and you can see that I love this guy. And he was the producer of the John Pertwee era. I adore this guy, but his directing in this particular story, I will admit, kind of falls flat. It's not as visually stunning as Spearheads from Space or Enemy of the World. But there are some great, there are some great action scenes, especially this one in a quarry where there's, I think it's 2 or 3 Autons chasing the Doctor, Joe Grant, Brigadier, Mike Yates, and a just random redshirt unit soldier. And there's a great bit where Mike Yates hits one with a car. Now here's a fun fact: the actual scripting said that he just knocks him out of the way and he falls to the floor. But there was a mistake, and he actually hit the stunt man in the Auton suit, and he just rolled down a massive, really steep cliff face. And that was actually a mistake. But however, the stunt was so well done and it looked so brutal, they kept it in. Which is why when you actually watch it, it's kind of strange how quickly he gets up. As if the stunt man was basically petrified, full of adrenaline. So there you go. And it's a really great stunt. Really good props to that. Maybe it's a little bit of the directing at this point is a bit weak, as there's a lot of moments where we don't really understand the geography of this place. Like sometimes it feels like the Doctor and Joe Grant should be walking towards an Auton, and then it cuts to them running away with one in the background, and it's we don't really know what's what. But before this, there was a great cliffhanger where the Doctor and Joe Grant are saved by some police officers, and the Doctor then removes one of their faces to reveal it's an Auton. Very classic Doctor Who moment. Another of my favourite scenes in this story is the first interaction of the Doctor and the Master in this story, which is actually the cliffhanger for part 3. They don't actually even talk until the ending of part 3, in which the Doctor gets a phone call from the Master, and he says something like, "Hello, Doctor, what do you want?" "Nothing, just to say goodbye." And he sends a signal that uses the plastic on the phone line to wrap around the Doctor, and just John Pertwee's eyes bulging out and is very enthusiastic about it. Really shines through. It makes it maybe a bit too comical, but it does work and puts you at the edge of your seat, and it's also incredibly funny. So it does means that this story leads all of the Master parts at the end of part 4, which I don't think is a problem, because the Master's in every story in season 8, so it's not really an issue. But it does mean that in this story, his introduction is mainly just him talking to his henchman about how he's going to kill the Doctor for most of the story. So, there you go. But there are some really great scenes, and I love how Robert Delgado just plays him. Very iconic. Now, the ending of this story has been criticised, and even Terence Dicks, Barry Letts and Robert Holmes have said it's a bit anticlimactic. When you have the Master's basically been setting up an invasion for the Autons to take Earth and let him at least take control of it. And so he starts sending the signal, but the Doctor talks to him for like 3 seconds and is like, do you really think they would let you live, make you set a difference between you and everyone else? They'll just kill you along with everyone. And then the Master kind of is like, you're right. And so he then decides to work with the Doctor for this moment. And yeah, it does it is a weak ending to otherwise a great story. However, I think the Autons element of that is weak, but the real ending is the Master kind of escapes into a van, and then he comes out silently. But before he can draw his gun, he gets shot, and the Doctor then removes his face to reveal it was the henchman who was disguised as the Master, so the Master is free. That is a great ending. A lot of people don't talk about that ending, but that is a very great ending. So that's Terror of the Autons. Overall, I think it's the weakest third Doctor story so far, but it is a fantastic watch. It's only 4 parts long, so it is a breeze to watch. But in terms of directing, I don't think it's as strong as the other 4 stories that we've talked about. It does have some balancing issues in terms of like what demographic is it going for, and there's some really odd moments, but there are some great bits to enjoy. Like I said, the deaths in this story are absolutely brutal, and there's a lot of scary moments, like I said, with the doll and the policeman's being revealed as an Auton. It's a great introduction to Joe Grant and a great introduction to the Master, but to have them both being introduced in the same story kind of weakens each effect. So there you go, that's my feelings on Terror of the Autons. So join me next time. I can't think of anything witty to say, so I'll just say it. So join me next time where we'll watch The Minds of Evil. I'll see you then on the Doctor Who Marathon.